This is a chart near and dear to your heart, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
Cursor, the fastest SaaS growth in history, $500 million of ARR in under 3 years, blowing away Anthropic and Uber and OpenAI. Talk to me about this.
This is so inspiring for the teams in the office at Link Studio. So, Link Studio, now we have 26 teams, MIT, Harvard, Northeastern. And this team...
These are startup companies that are being incubated at Link Studio.
Yeah, I mean, they're exactly. And they're culturally just like Cursor, like 3, 4, 5 best friends from school, brilliant, but never operated a company before, building something with AGI or AI that's groundbreaking. And so they see a company like this thriving and hitting a huge valuation, but also, back when this happened in the internet era, you got huge valuations, but the companies were very fragile because they didn't have a huge amount of revenue. These companies, 500 million of revenue, the margins on that must be astronomical. And so they're raising a lot of money at a big valuation, greater than 10 billion-ish. But they can actually operate profitably, on one day's notice if they want to, because they're not headcount intensive. So these are like the best companies financially that we've ever seen in history. And then the timelines are just laughable, like 2 years to get to 500 million of revenue.
How many Cursors are out there in the next couple of years?
Dozens. It's actually constrained by the number of teams, not by the number of opportunities.
So it's fascinating, right? We got constraints on electricity, on chips, and on the smartest entrepreneurs who take this forward. At least for the moment, it's humans that are constraining.
Well, I mean, the difference in the vibe around Boston versus any time I've ever seen is just so blatantly obvious and palpable. You just need to walk around. But everywhere you go, everyone's like, just talking about Scale AI, talking about Cursor. These are, their fellow alumni that they actually knew.
Yeah.
And so, the jealousy factor is a great motivator. It's really an amazing time.
Salim, and these are all exponential organizations.
All EXOs. They have an MTP. They're using community effectively. They're building developer communities. The engagement levels are really great. They've gamified in many cases what they're trying to do. It's phenomenal to watch. We predicted this in the book, right? We said we're going to have just a continuing increase in the velocity and scale and speed. I mean, this is surprising even to us at some level because the speed of, 500 million ARR in this time scale is just unbelievable. I do agree with Dave. There's a lot more coming down the pike on this. And these curves are just going to get more and more vertical. The teams is a really intriguing problem. How do you find the right teams? And I'm wondering if you could use an AI solution to find teams that can then be put together and thrown together for this. That would be a really interesting problem.
Dave, can you do that? I mean, one of our $1 billion investments is Mercor. That is all about, finding and hiring. But is that for the general employee? What are the attributes of the founding team that you're looking for?
Yeah, great question. And, we study that all the time. We quote the Fred Wilson rule a lot. We call it the Fred Wilson rule. Fred didn't call it. He's the Union Square Ventures founder, MIT alum, most successful venture capitalist of all time, numerically. Keeps a low profile, so we don't talk about him every day. But Fred Wilson is really a god of the industry. But what he says, as he gets older is, I always invest in teams of 3 or more best friends who write the code themselves, meaning they're really technical, all 3 of them or more, and I trust them. And if they pass those 3 filters, I invest even if it's the stupidest idea in the world, because they'll change the idea much more quickly. You can't change friendships, you can't change relationships, you can't change yourself overnight, but you can change your idea overnight. And once you get them into an ecosystem of other people that have great ideas, take them out to Silicon Valley, introduce them to Eric Brynjolfsson, take them to HAI, take them over to OpenAI headquarters, run them through Google. We're doing all that with these teams now. Then they come back home and they're enlightened and they always have good ideas at the end of that road trip.
Let me hit on one of the points there. People say, why should they be best friends? Why should they be around, haven't had a relationship for a number of years? We just saw these large companies like Meta and Google and OpenAI are just raiding companies and stripping out the talent. And if you've started a company with some stranger that you don't know, and it's been 6 months and someone gives you a huge signing bonus, you're going to leave. But if you've started a company with your best friends and you've got long history, you're not going to abandon them. I think
That's
that's a
exactly
really
right.
critical point.
That's the number one failure mode actually for companies is that somebody bails. Because you'll always succeed in the end if you stick with it. And so the way you characterized
You'll
it
pivot a
is
dozen
exactly
times.
right.
You'll
Pivot a dozen
pivot.
times, and look, name any one of these companies that didn't pivot at least once. Going back to PayPal, and every one of them, pivots at least once. And so that's just part of the journey. But when you pivot and then someone says, "Oh, I give up, I'm leaving," that's what ends up killing the company. So also the way I've been phrasing it for many, many years is more true than ever before. Imagine that you're on an international flight and you're sitting right next to somebody in a middle seat. The way you feel when you get off that flight, that's the way it's going to feel when you're doing a startup together. So, if it's you and me and Salim flying, we're going to come off that plane energized because we've been talking about everything in the world for hours, 8, 10, 12 hours.
Not only that, we'll have infected the 3 rows around us to all get into a conversation.
Yeah, walk out with more employees than you started with.
Yeah, Salim, when we had Singularity University's graduate studies program, the GSP, going, and we were starting companies that had a 10 to the 9th plus mission, right? Impact 1 billion people over a decade. And we were starting companies. It was around the same exact time frame that Y Combinator was getting going. And the failure mode, I think, was that we thrust, 100 alpha males and females into a room independent of each other and said, start a company. And that was very different than Y Combinator, where teams came in with an idea already. And that glue pre-existing with something that they're all passionate about, I think is a super differentiator for investments.
And if you look at the track record, the ones that did succeed were the ones that became friends and stuck together over time. The one thing we did do was created lasting friendships that were lifetime long. And so if you look back, a lot of those alumni have gone and started working together with where they found affinity, not necessarily on the teams. That team formation is a critical one, and that early chemistry is really important. I remember this whole conversation reminds me of Yossi Vardi, who kind of single-handedly created the Israeli startup scene.
Yeah.
And he sold ICQ, then became AOL Instant Messenger for like $500 million back.
I remember it well.
and he did something amazing. He basically went to founders in Israel and said, if you're a good guy and you have integrity, I'm giving you $50K. That's the bar. And then he just trusted them. And he would check their integrity and their character very carefully, and then he'd just give them money. And he invested in something like 400 startups. And the outcome of those has been a little bit like the Fred Wilson type, where it's just been off the hook. So the team and the individual that you're betting on is everything in this type of world.
Salim, you're so right. And you reminded me of something that's really, really important. Peter, remember when we went over to Israel, to Tel Aviv, to Startup Nation, to try and figure out why the startup success rate is 5 times higher there than anywhere else on the world per capita? Than anywhere else in the world. And there are a lot of reasons, but a lot of it comes back to everyone has to do their military time. And there's a huge amount of bonding, just marching through the desert together and suffering together. And that creates these lifelong friendships. Then you go to college and you appreciate it a lot more. And then you start your company while you're in college. And so they're a little older, but a lot more bonded when they're going through that experience. But if I port that back to the US, MIT is absolutely thriving like I've never seen before in terms of startup success. But Daniela Roos, who runs C-Sale at MIT, biggest AI lab in the world, she has 2 daughters. One went to Harvard, one went to MIT. Her Harvard daughter was constantly at MIT for the parties. And nobody thinks of MIT as a party school, right? Like, why would you? But actually, when you're there, it has an immense amount of bonding. Part of it is because the way it's set up with the living groups and the fraternities and sororities. Part of it is because the school is so freaking hard. And that's like the Marines.
You cannot get through on your own. Those problem sets, all night long with your best buddies trying to get answers.
Just a plug here for Waterloo, which is the MIT of Canada. We had the same thing. You couldn't get through unless you collaborated really closely with a bunch of other fellow students, and that created lifelong friendships. Really great point.